Namaskar viewers, hello and welcome to Sansad TV. I'm Tina Jha, you're watching Perspective. The world is very likely to miss the most important climate target of limiting global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, which would cause irrevocable damage to the planet's ecosystem and severely impact humans and other living beings. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is a UN-backed body of the world's leading climate scientists, has warned. Releasing the report on Monday, the scientists said keeping global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels requires deep, rapid and sustained greenhouse gas emissions reductions in all sectors. Now, reacting to the report, United Nations Chief Antonio Guterres said humanity is now on thin ice and that ice is melting fast. The climate time bomb is ticking. The 1.5 degree limit is although still achievable, but it will take a quantum leap in climate action. Guterres urged rich countries to reach net zero by 2040 and the developing countries to aim for 2050. The IPCC Synthesis Report is a summary of all the reports produced since 2015 on the reasons and consequences of global temperature rise due to anthropogenic emissions. So on this broadcast, we will try and analyze the key takeaways of the IPCC report and also try and understand from experts what the world needs to do to ensure rapid, deep and immediate greenhouse gas emissions reductions to prevent the overshoot. To discuss it further, I'm pleased to welcome on the program Ms. Urmi Goswami. She's a senior journalist. And joining us virtually are two guests, Ms. Meenal Pathak, senior scientist, IPCC, and Mr. C.K. Mishra, former Secretary, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, Government of India. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program today. Ms. Meenal Pathak, allow me to begin the program today with you since you are the one representing the IPCC here on the panel today. To begin with, why is this report of the IPCC so important?
Thank you so much for having me. This is, as we all know, the synthesis report is the last of the 6th assessment report products, and it will inform the 2023 global stocktake by the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. This is when next year or soon enough, in a few months, the countries will review the progress towards the Paris Agreement goals, including where we are on 2 degrees and 1.5. So this is an important output. It synthesizes the 3 main reports of the IPCC, the report on climate change science, on adaptation and on mitigation, and the 3 special reports on 1.5 degrees, climate change and land, and climate change in oceans and cryosphere.
Okay. Mr. Mishra, so before we get on to the consequences and what action the world needs to take, what is the most critical message that you see for India, considering that we too are extremely vulnerable to climate change events?
Indeed, India is very, very vulnerable, and we need to take the report as well as what is going on in-house very seriously. What the report is saying loud and clear is that we are not on the path we were supposed to be. Let me just pause for a moment here and say that 1.5 degree for the global scenario is a very, very difficult thing right now. Fortunately, as far as Paris goals are concerned, at least on that, India seems to be on track. India has done well and is on track. But the question that I would like to ask is, even if we do our Paris goals, is that enough to bring us to 1.5?
Right.
I really feel that is not enough. So what we should be talking about is not what we set as our goal in Paris, but the ultimate goal, which is limiting it to 1.5 degrees. And that doesn't seem to be happening. All the tools that you need to really make it happen do not seem to be present in the global scenario. World, according to me, is acting in fragments, in different groups. There is very little cohesion on a common goal, and unless globally a common goal is set, I don't think we are getting anywhere. Let us very clearly understand that my merely 7 or 8 or 10 big countries getting to the goal does not mean that the globe has got to the goal. And if the others are missing it, let us understand that even those who claim to have got the goal will miss it.
Right. So how do we cooperate better, and what solutions, what urgent solutions the world needs to work upon is something that we will discuss in the course of the program. But may I please also welcome on the program Ms. Erin Sikorsky, Director, the Center for Climate and Security and the International Military Council on Climate and Security, USA. Ms. Sikorsky, thank you for your time and welcome to Sansad TV. before you joined us, we got a perspective from Ms. Meenal Pathak. She's a senior scientist at the IPCC, and Mr. C.K. Mishra. He's served as secretary in the Ministry of Environment and Forest, Government of India. Your perspective on how you look at the report and the consequences that the IPCC now wants the world of. So 1.5 degree, we are most likely to overshoot, and how the world now needs to brace for worst consequences of climate change events.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and kudos to Meenal and the team for putting out this new report. I know it's such a huge process, and it's so important. And my takeaway from the report yesterday is that we have to be able, the world has to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time, as we say here in the United States. We have to be able to adapt, right, to this 1.5 degree world and invest so that countries that are already being hit with the worst impacts of climate change today can build resilience and weather those events, while also pursuing goals to cut emissions, right? It's not either or. We can't do one or the other. We have to do both. And we have to be willing to do both more quickly than we have been thus far. And certainly there are huge political challenges there. I think it's mostly, frankly, a political problem. But from the security side, where I sit, if we don't do both of these things, the security implications for countries around the globe are very severe. And it will strain governments, it will lead to further instability, it will lead to further competition and conflict. And so there's really, sometimes I say here in the US when I'm talking to policymakers, they may not care about the environment, but if they care about security, they have to care about climate change. There isn't a security or foreign policy issue that won't be shaped by what this report details, and we need to take the warning seriously.
Absolutely. The fact is, it's a huge challenge, but we need to overcome this challenge, Ms. Goswami. The question now is, we have very little time. As you heard the United Nations chief say that the clock is ticking, we have absolutely very less time. Do you see now the IPCC report being in any way an important report that we now could use for negotiations and better negotiations when we talk climate at important events this year?
The IPCC's main sort of duty or mandate is actually to produce the best possible science, to bring together all the scientific work, assess it, and produce something that policymakers can use. And that has been its mandate. So the IPCC report has historically meant to help further negotiations, further the conversation. This year, we can see that clearly what the IPCC, scientists at the IPCC have done is ensure that this message is even more clear, and more importantly, and I think that's what makes this report, this final report, which is actually a synthesis, as Meenal explained, of the preceding reports of this cycle, more special in that sense is that it also provides solutions in the sense that it gives you the directions in which you have to go if we have to actually meet the goal. They're very clear. So there is, time is short, but all is not lost and we can act. But you have to act really quickly. And I think all IPCC reports do inform negotiations. Hopefully, this time it will inform much more, primarily because this year is when the global stocktake will come to an end. At the Dubai COP28, you will have the end of the political process of the global stocktake. And if we have been, as you've been hearing, the UNFCCC Executive Secretary Simon Steele say that he is looking not, and this is something that's reiterated by the COP28 President-designate, Mr. Sultan Al-Jaber, that they're not looking at the global stocktake to be just an assessment of where we are, which we all know very far from our goals, but also to create a roadmap to get on track. So in that sense, this IPCC report has the potential to be super useful. Now the real question is, because you must remember that when this report is finalized, the summary for policymakers, the one which we all actually read before yesterday, as it was being released, is a document that's negotiated, and is negotiated with representatives of governments. Now we have to see that having agreed to this document in that room, will the same representatives or their colleagues agree to take it forward when they meet in the other rooms? And that is a critical question. But yes, like all IPCC reports, it is important and it will inform the negotiations. This time, the role that the IPCC report has is much greater thanks to the global stocktake, the urgency of the problem. So yes, I see that. And there are validations, like in the case of India, which raised the issue of the proposal, which proposed phasing out of all fossil fuels at Sharm el-Sheikh. This IPCC report again very clearly says that we cannot afford to have more fossil fuels. So, you know, it depends on how the country uses this moment, this report. The report is there for countries to be guided, and it has a lot of options. Now, the question is, will countries be guided?
Right. So how do these guiding principles work is something that I'll go back to Ms. Meenal Pathak and understand. So this report, the good thing about this report is it doesn't just give us a reality check of where we are in terms of reaching these goals. Of course, we stand quite far, but it also guides as to what directions, what timely measures the world, the countries together need to take to ensure that we are able to lessen the damage and we are able to reach the goal. So, Ms. Meenal Pathak, let me come to you for some of the quick solutions, immediate solutions, and some workable, feasible solutions that the world can actually begin to take.
Thank you so much. And I would agree that the report doesn't just call out to the issues and where the world is. It's not a doomsday warning, but it is also a message. We would like to give a message of hope. And given where we are now, we can still say it. I don't know if I will be able to say this 5 or 6 years from now, given the trajectory as we are on, as Mr. Mishra said. But right now, there are solutions on the table. And even for countries like India, and Erin did point this out, that 1.5 is a priority, yes, but for some countries, development is also a priority. And fortunately, the report lays down solutions that can deliver both climate change, mitigation, adaptation, but also development benefits. And some of the solutions listed in the report are, for example, around cities and how you can plan urban areas better to take up the opportunities. For example, co-locating jobs and housing. How do we build, make our buildings better? Can we do something with building codes? What do we do about clean transport? And we all know that clean transport solutions and simple solutions like providing more public transport or facilitating the shift to public transport, more walking and cycling and infrastructure that enables such a shift. All of these solutions are there for countries like India, and also globally, of course. We need to really work and protect our ecosystems, and protecting ecosystems has all a range of benefits, from food security to biodiversity. We also talk about solutions that enable behavior and lifestyle change, and the report calls to status consumption, the consumption of the rich, the top 10% of the richest households globally, which consume a large share of resources, materials, energy, and therefore contribute higher to greenhouse gas emissions. So the solutions, of course, differ by capacity of countries, of people, by income and development level. So we are not all at the same place. There are different starting points, but recognizing where we are, there are opportunities on the table that can deliver, like I said, mitigation, like, for example, enhancing the green and blue infrastructure in cities. Can we look at our urban forests, urban parks, preserving our lakes, and these provide great public spaces. They can deliver well-being. Can we do something about if we make our buildings better, then we can. This provides a solution both for adaptation and mitigation, by making people comfortable to the extremes that we are going to witness in terms of heat.
Right.
So there's a lot of policies and actions that are listed in the report.
Okay. Mr. Mishra, taking on from what Ms. Meenal Pathak said about how for a lot of countries today development is a priority, and clearly India stands among the few countries because of the huge population, and also a significant proportion of our population is relatively young. So for us, development will be a priority for the coming few decades as well. How are we ensuring that all of our policy measures, all our development measures are also sustainable?
So, particularly with reference to India, I mean, the development imperative is very critical and will continue to be so because there is no reason, historically speaking, why the fruits of development in a country like India should not reach the last man. There is no reason to say that he should be deprived for anything. Having said that, I always feel that this conflict or the perceived conflict between development and preservation of nature or development and climate change is a non starter. Technologies, resources have proved time and again that you can do both and do it to the satisfaction of both sides, actually. And if you look at Indian development story, the key word has been responsible growth. I don't want to get into details about India. You can look at the renewable story or you can look at the other stories. But what I would, generic prescription that the world must look at, I would like to come to that. See, first, my worry is the IPCC report is a very critical paper before the world to decide the direction they are going to take. My worry is who's reading it? Is it the academicians? Is it the discussants like us who are reading it? Or is it those, as was mentioned by Erin, that the political will creators who are reading it? It has to be read not just by the right people, but in the right light.
Right.
Only then will you move ahead. See, there are solutions which are simple and solutions which would be acceptable to everyone and doable. Let all countries do that. But when it comes to more difficult solution, let us say hard to abate segments, for example, because we're talking about a reduction in emission. So let's take hard to abate segment. Now, hard to abate segment means technology, means investment of resources. And as Meenal pointed out, the starting points are clearly defined as different points. So those who are non-starters, can a good starter help them take them along to that finishing point?
Okay.
Who's holding hands is the question. So far, globally, that spirit seems to be absent. If you really want to race against time and reach 1.5 degree goal, the spirit will have to be that it's not just I who will run. I'll make sure that the who are running slow come along with me.
Ms. Erin, how do we ensure that when we say no one is left behind, we actually mean it? So those who have actually, who have the capacity, who have the money, can now help those who have contributed the least to climate change, but they today are the most vulnerable. So how do we ensure that together, and India believes in Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, we say the world is family. So we cannot work in silos, we cannot progress in silos. It's everybody's problem and everybody has to work together. Perhaps that will that you also spoke about is lacking. But when we are racing against time, what is it that will bring the world together to come up with the solution which is already being given by the IPCC?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think, again, sitting here in the United States and thinking about US policies, I think it's important to show the US why it's in its own interests, right? To invest and provide climate finance, for example, and live up to its commitments that it has made to provide financing to the developing world. And we can make the argument that it's our responsibility. That doesn't work with everyone here in the US. We also need to make the argument that it's in our benefit, I think, to really get that action. And it absolutely is, because if we don't make those investments, if we don't help countries that are the most vulnerable manage these risks, as I said earlier, it can contribute to instability, it can contribute to geopolitical conflict, which will come back and potentially hurt the United States. And so I think we need to find ways, I think, in a security community that I work in, to show the security risks if we don't make these climate finance investments. And I think the conversation that was had in Sharm el-Sheikh last year around loss and damage and the progress that was made there is a good sign. I think just last week here in the United States, the intelligence community presented its annual threat assessment to Congress about what it was worried about in the coming year. And one of the things that was mentioned was the growing divide in the world over climate finance, that the developed countries aren't living up to their promises to developing countries, and that's going to create real tensions. And I think policymakers in the United States and in the West need to listen to that and recognize the risks there and make those investments. And I think that's hopefully where we will begin to see progress when there's more of a recognition that we're all in this together and that what happens in other places can affect our security here at home. But I know that's a big focus for us and our organization going forward.
Okay. Ms. Urmi Goswami, Erin Sikorsky spoke about climate finance. It came about after a great deal of negotiations. Now, there's another view that funding from rich nations should not be the only source that the developing world should, look at. Perhaps they should now diversify and look for other options. So if I may ask you in the context of India, what are the other options that we can look for?
Well, when we're talking about climate finance, and this has been like an ongoing debate, but I think in many ways we have come to accept that it's not going to be all public finance. I mean, given the needs globally, the needs are in the trillions. India's own needs are in billions for each year if we are to meet our net zero goals. So therefore, the fact is that you are not going to get. There is no reasonable way we can expect that public finance, even domestically, public finance being the only way to get money towards climate goals. That's one. So even globally, the conversation it's accepted that it will not be public finance. It has to be private finance, public finance, leveraging private finance. Then you have, of course, the development banks. Then you have pension funds. So that is thing. Then there are carbon markets, another way of getting money into towards climate goals. And as we are moving towards net zero, the fact is that everything gets interlinked. So you will have. What we really need is for a financial system to be aligned to the Paris goals so that they are not investing in anything that takes away from, towards the 1.5 goal that we have. So clearly, when we are talking, even for India, when we are talking, and India more so than many other countries, we are looking at all kinds of finance. I mean, just look at the jewel in our climate policy, which is our renewable energy portfolio. Actually, is overwhelmingly driven by private investment, right? So you're not depending on public, but you need the public investment to drive in those places where private money will not go, or where you need to provide guarantees. So the other kind of mechanisms you're looking at in finance is risk guarantee, payment guarantees. This is where we expect governments, whether singularly in their domestic capacities or collectively, provide that comfort so that money comes. One of the funny things is that if you have a conversation with any of the finance people, they'll tell you there's plenty of money in the world. So the world is awash with money. And yet, most of the money, when it comes for clean finance, clean tech or clean options, is actually being invested in developed countries and China. Some of it comes to some emerging economies like India, very little actually. And the countries that need it the most, the least developed countries, small island states in Africa, and even in Latin America, get the least amount of money. And that has to change. If we are going to actually address climate change or tackle it, that has to change. So that will only come.
That's an important point that, the investment that is coming in, the climate finance that we're talking about, there needs to be optimal utilization, optimal distribution in terms of mitigation and adaptation that you just spoke about. But Ms. Meenal Pathak, each time we talk about climate change and the consequences and the warnings, we talk about the political will, the lack of collective action, also the lack of fund. But what about behavioral change? How important is behavioral change in today's times to ensure that we see the kind of change that we want to, for the world to and for the earth to be much more sustainable, and we humans living a much more healthier and sustainable life?
This is an important question and also a very important finding from the sixth assessment cycle. This is the first time in the IPCC that a chapter was dedicated to lifestyles and behavioral change, the social dimensions of mitigation. And lifestyle change can happen in the form of small changes, for example, set point adjustments or changing diets or the way we travel, the way we live, how we can how we adjust our lifestyles and behavior, how we consume, where what we consume comes from. So it's a very important aspect, but we also must recognize that this does not happen on its own. It would be unfair to say that individual behavior alone can solve the climate problem. And the report clearly emphasizes that behavioral change has to be supported by policies, by technology, and by infrastructure. So with that whole package, yes, lifestyle and behavioral change is important, no matter what region or country you're talking about. And I would also like to highlight the Government of India's Mission Life, which I feel is a landmark initiative for a developing country, which talks about changing lifestyles for environment. Life stands for, lifestyles for environment, which talks about moving away from a throwaway society to a more system, which is inherently a part of the culture as well. And I think we need policies like this at all scales, at the national, state and the local level, and platforms such as these. It's not just up to the scientists. We have delivered a report, but now it is for the other actors to take the messages from the report. And I talk about, of course, governments, but also the private sector, also civil society organizations, the media, the journalists, the communicators, school teachers, and really we are at a stage where we need all hands on deck. So thank you so much.
Clearly.
Yeah.
So the bottom line is that it's time. It's a call for action, and the right time for action now, if we want to see the kind of transformational change towards a more sustainable and a more equitable world that we all keep talking about and we dream to have. So that having been said, I'll have to wind up the program. I'd like to thank all my guests, Ms. Sikorsky, Mr. Mishra, and Ms. Meenal Pathak, and Ms. Urmi Goswami for joining us on the program today, sharing your thoughts with us and our viewers. And to you viewers, thank you very much for your time as well. I'll see you same time tomorrow now. Take good care of yourselves. Keep watching.